Democrats, as always, wanting people being white to be illegal. And being white is a very broad term. Well, being white is a noble goal.
No, making it illegal.
To all of you out there who want to be white who aren't, yeah, good luck to you.
No, we can do it. You just have to say you're white, remember?
Yeah, well, you just break out the chalk.
No.
What? It's fine. Anyway, yeah, so being white is no longer just, having a skin colour or hailing from a particular part of the world. It is subscribing to a particular way of life and having a certain history and set of values that you want to live your life by, which makes you, of course, automatically evil. And the Democrats being anti-evil, and you can tell they're the good guys because they're anti-evil and they align with the anti-fascists, and because they have anti-fascist in their name, means if you don't agree with them, you're an evil fascist. This is just how the world works, of course. They want to, prevent people from being evil. Before I go any further and explain what's going on here, I just want to say that I've got a new article out today, as of this morning, called Anatomy of the Communist. This is a premium article, so you will have to be a bronze tier member or higher to be able to view it. If you're a silver member, you do have an audio track done by the wonderful John Crow. And this article I'm really happy with, actually. Excuse me. Where I'm just talking about how communism is not necessarily just an economic system as put out by Karl Marx, but it's also the ideology, all of the practical theories for how the world should work outside of the economic system that really characterizes a communist. I think a communist is somebody who hates traditional family structures, who hates generally Western culture, who has outgroup preferences, all this sort of stuff that you can also ally with just general progressivism. So I just explain it and go through a lot of literary references and other such things and my own understanding of what a communist is. So give that a read if you're interested. It might be a good one for people who aren't really aware of what communism really is, because it kind of tries to go through the fundamentals. But there you go, you can check that out. But as I said, being white is not something that people like anymore, especially liberal white people in America themselves. They hate it, and Josh and I have covered this recently. Well, a few months ago. It was long enough ago that I still had the facial fur going on. But this was the unbearable whiteness of everything, where Josh literally just went on Google and typed in the unbearable whiteness of, and it came up with many, many, many ridiculous examples. So this is a perfect example that we've got on screen where we're laughing about the unbearable whiteness of milk. Do you know every sip of milk that you drink drains the melanin straight from your body?
I have heard this. Tariq Nasheed has given us the gospel.
It really does. But it also shores up your defences against sickle cell anemia. So it's kind of a...
Makes no sense. This is not medical advice.
This is not medical advice. I am not a doctor. But trust me, bro, it was revealed in a dream. So there's that. Then we also saw what whiteness could be considered from the Smithsonian guidelines that they gave a few years ago now. So if we could just scroll down to the notorious infographic so we can understand what being white is. And this is white culture in the United States. So we've got things like white dominant culture and how it's been normalized in the United States. It's almost as though the people who made up the colonies were generally Northern European white people. But
well, it's very more specific than that, isn't it? Like in this graph, they have, what is it, Protestant work ethic. So we got rid of all the Catholics. Well, that's gone. There's no Irish, for sure.
Okay, and so you're out the picture straight away.
Oi. And then they have more in here where they talk about the fact of, what is it, the King's English?
Yeah, the King's English. We can see women's beauty being based on blonde, thin Barbie. So if you're a fan or attracted to blonde, thin women, you're a racist.
If you're Nordic.
Yes, if you're Nordic, if you like Swedish women, you're a racist. If you go down a bit so we can just see the bottom of communication, being polite is white.
And the King's English. Was like, well, who in Europe speaks English? Would be the English.
Yes.
So there you are. So we've narrowed it down to literally posh English people. That's whiteness.
Yes. English, the descendants of English colonists need to be eradicated. I mean, banned. I mean, stopped from promoting white supremacist culture. Because, they can say, oh, we're not saying that white people need to go, blah, blah, blah. We're just describing the characteristics. We know that whenever used in context, saying that somebody is proliferating whiteness or etc., they're using it in a negative sense. They're saying that this is a bad thing, that this is happening. I do love some of the things. So planning for the future and timekeeping as well is also being white. They're very complementary, to be honest. But it's the fact that they want to promote the opposite of these values, which is why they're labeling them with the white label. Ooh, evil, scary, spooky. And I went to the ADL's website as well to get a definition of what white supremacy is, because the ADL are going to be the most impartial and unbiased source for such a thing. So they say it's a term used to characterize various belief systems central to a few of these tenets. Now, a few of those tenets are ones that, yeah, you could say, yeah, that sounds pretty not something that I support and disavow, potentially. So just that whites should have dominance over other people of other backgrounds, whether they coexist or not, and that they're genetically superior, yada, yada, yada. But they do also highlight here that white people have their own culture that is superior to other cultures. That's also white supremacist, apparently. Having their own culture, in scary quotation marks, okay, and that's superior. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be racist. That just means that I prefer my culture. Doesn't even mean that I'm exclusionary. Other people can also adopt the values and tenets of my culture and stick to those if they want, and I think that's a good thing.
I think this makes North Korea the most white supremacist country on earth.
Almost certainly.
Because
in every case, the most white supremacist countries inevitably end up being East Asian, according to these standards.
No, but the North Korean, like the whole reason for the apparatus of the state and it being so strict in North Korea is to stop cultural pollution. So...
Pretty white supremacist of you, Kim. What's going on there, bro? And then we also have most white supremacists today further believe that the white race is in danger of extinction due to a rising flood of non-whites who are controlled and manipulated by Jews, and that imminent action is needed to save the white race. Now, I'm not going to make any comment on who is orchestrating this, but as we pointed out, this is just an observable fact that they are trying to replace us, and they brag about it. Whenever it's not a right-winger saying it, they say that demographic change is a good thing. We need to change the states in particular areas like Texas. We need to get that to a purple state before we can flip it to a blue state. They want to import a foreign population who they are banking on being more likely to vote Democrat in the US.
But they assume that if you're not white,
explain.
you vote Dem, and that's not necessarily true. And in fact, in the UK, we've had that proven wrong in a few ways. And increasingly in the United States as well. But this is the worldview of the left. I mean, that's the weird thing about the last lines there. They're describing this as the white supremacist worldview. But when you ask a Democrat about why do you want mass immigration, they give you this line, like, this is what we want to do. And it's like, but why? So, why would you do that? What kind of mad world are you living in? And they're like, yeah, but then I'll get more votes. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, well,
you believe in the same thing as the white supremacists.
And they do that, and then they also believe that the white way of life, if they want to characterize it that being sort of like kind of local, parochial, everybody knows each other, small town ethos, really kind of wholesome small town America sort of stuff. They look down on those people. They hate those people.
Yeah, sure.
And they want to get rid of that way of life.
It's the Jews that always makes me laugh. Like, do you know the meme that a JOO? Ben Shapiro does it a lot because it's just funny. Because it's the idea that basically like Jews are one monolith, like hyper being with the puppet strings. It's just like, it's the Jew. And it's like, okay, whatever. Yeah. Retard. Like, it's a completely diverse group of people with different opinions.
For another explanation, I got this Atlantic article which explains what the language of white supremacy is, and this is all leading up to something. Don't worry, John. If we could go to the next one for me, please. Thank you. The language of white supremacy, talking about narrow definitions of the term, actually help to continue the work of the architects of the post-Jim Crow racial hierarchy. The post-Jim Crow racial hierarchy surely being that of the Civil Rights Act. So, I don't get what the point of that's supposed to be. Either way, it talks about how white supremacy is framed as a broad concept, because if we have it narrow, if we have it accurate in describing one particular thing, it's much less useful as a political tool, because everybody knows that when you say white supremacy or white supremacist, that gets most people's alarm bells ringing, because that's just been hammered into them from childhood. So white supremacy is framed as a broad concept, one where wielding racism or benefiting from it, even in subtle forms, note that there is no mention of intention there, it's just if you are white and benefit in some way from white supremacy, which they say is just a broad system of values, then you are bad. Okay. To quote scholar Francis Lee Ansley, by white supremacy, I do not mean to allude to the only self-conscious racism of white supremacist hate groups. I refer instead to a political, economic, cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources. Conscious and unconscious ideas of white supremacy and entitlement are widespread, and relations of white dominance and non-white subordination are daily reenacted across a broad array of institutions and social settings. Evidence? Evidence for any of that? No. No, we don't need to prove that that's happening, or even that that is something that is widespread throughout America. We just need to say it is, and then people go along with it. They even give example in this article of, seeing as there's been a bit of MLK bashing recently, I thought I'd join in. In his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, MLK also talking in similar language, saying that it's which is itself, it says here, in his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, which is itself concerned with hope and building interracial solidarity, King wrote the doctrine of white supremacy was embedded in every textbook and preached in practically every pulpit. It became a structural part of the culture. King saw that white supremacy was a structural pillar of America, equally important to democracy itself. In that work, he also analysed white backlash not as an insurgency responding to proximate political factors or politicians, but as a visceral, enduring, autonomous response guided by white supremacy. In other words, King used white supremacy in a way that might have seen him scolded today by many who do the scolding in his name. So that's always very interesting because, once again, and this is something I'll be covering in a premium podcast soon, people like to think that King was this race unconscious, colorblind kind of guy. No, he wasn't, and he was really the kind of guy who was the massive forebear to a lot of the critical race theory stuff that we see nowadays. He would have agreed with a lot of that stuff. He often said that America needed a fundamental and revolutionary change in its own values. So that's the sort of stuff that we understand as white supremacy. These days, it's not just a specific act, it's not just being racist or evil to other people on a practical level, it's living within the structures. And therefore, we have to criminalize it, say the Democrats. And we've got this coming through the House of Representatives soon, the Leading Against White Supremacy Act of 2023. Can you see this going well, Callum?
I'd love to hear the definition of white supremacy, because if it involves speaking the King's English...
would you like to know if there is a white supremacist, a proper definition of white supremacy in this bill?
No, there's not going to be.
No, of course there isn't. It's nice and nebulous, so we can just have it as being any of those things that I've covered before. If you're on time to work, sorry chap, off to prison with you. I like to call this, as John has dubbed, the Antiwhite Existence Bill. And so let's read through a little bit of it and what it's planning on doing. So the bill to prevent and prosecute white supremacy-inspired hate crime and conspiracy to commit white supremacy-inspired hate crime, and to amend Title 18, the United States Code, to expand the scope of hate crime. So it's going to go into the hate crime legislation that already exists and expand it to just say white supremacy as well, even though you would think the definitions of hate crimes already put out would cover white supremacy, but we need a special extra category, okay? In general, it's when a person engages in a white supremacy-inspired hate crime when white supremacy ideology has motivated the planning, development, preparation, or perpetration of actions that constituted a crime or were undertaken in furtherance of activity that, if effectuated, would have constituted a crime, which is circular bollocks, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, none of that made any sense.
White supremacy is when we say that white supremacy influenced a bad thing that happened. All right, okay, great. Fantastic, good to hear. The conspiracy to engage in white supremacy-inspired hate crime shall be determined to exist between two or more persons engaged in the planning, development, preparation, or perpetration of a white supremacist-inspired hate crime, or between two or more persons, at least one of whom engaged in the planning, development, preparation, or perpetration of a white supremacy-inspired hate crime. So I don't know how the other person comes into it at that point. If my friend just happens to actually go crazy and do something terrible, my being friends with him is just...
You're part of the conspiracy.
Apparently so. Okay, very interesting. And at least one of whom published material advancing white supremacy, white supremacist ideology. So just saying, if you send out a memo to everybody at work saying, hey guys, don't forget to get to work on time, boom, got him. Antagonism based on replacement theory. There it is. They're going to just... I think that's the ultimate real reason that they're trying to get this bill through, which is to just criminalize anybody saying replacement theory or advocating that it is a thing, unless you're a Democrat. Because, of course, given that these are laws that will be applied by real people, those real people will have their biases, and they will inevitably, if it's a Democrat or leftist saying that we're trying to replace you, that's fine. That's not white supremacy. That's just a good thing. If you're a right-winger saying, hey, they're trying to replace us and pointing to the evidence, then you'll be put in prison or charged or fined or something.
As Tucker Carlson almost found out.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Or hate speech that vilifies or otherwise directed against any non-white person or group. And such published material was published on a social media platform or by other means of publication with the likelihood that it would be viewed by persons who are predisposed to engaging in any action in furtherance of a white supremacy-inspired hate crime, or who are susceptible to being encouraged to engage in actions in furtherance of a white supremacy-inspired hate crime, or could, here's a fun one, as determined by a reasonable person, I've never met this mythical, reasonable person that I always see talked about in legal documents, but let's carry on just for the hypothetical. Motivate actions by a person predisposed to engaging in white supremacy, inspired hate crime, or by a person who is susceptible to being encouraged to engage in actions relating to a white supremacy, inspired hate crime. So you're just being... The onus is on you. If somebody possibly sees, and it says, was read, heard, or viewed by a person who engaged in the planning, development, preparation, or perpetration of a white supremacy-inspired hate crime. So, once again, white supremacy, not defined in here, nebulous term that can be used to mean literally anything that leftists don't like. And if you say something that is just potentially heard, maybe, by some guy who maybe went off and did something bad, the onus is on you to explain why you were being racist. Apparently. So I say, boy, I sure do love talking polite to people. Some guy overhears that, goes off and shoots up a school for some reason. That's my fault. It's a hard knock life.
I can't believe you would do this, Harry.
I know.
How could you dare speak the King's English and be polite to people? I mean, that is the crux of the thing, how you even define the term, and, well, this is define it as literally anything. This
is a nice grey bill. It's full of grey area, so it can just be applied literally any way that any activist, judge, or attorney wants it to be. It's just a tool. This is a hammer to be used to destroy dissent from the system. And the motivation, if you scroll down to the bottom of this page, because if there's one thing I can give to this document, the bill is like literally a page long. So at least there's that. At least she didn't feel the need, the person who filed this, to fill it with 30 pages of other pointless nonsense. But no, just right at the bottom of it, it says, it basically gives an explanation as to why they're doing it, and they also want this language added to Section 4702 of the James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which is, mass shootings and other hate crimes motivated by white supremacy have been increasing in frequency and intensity. These heinous and virulent crimes are inspired by conspiracy theories, blatant bigotry, and mythical falsehoods such as replacement theory. All instances must be prevented and severe criminal penalties must be applied to their perpetrators.
I can think of two.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear the examples given.
The New Zealand mosque shooter, not in the United States, but whatever. And the guy in, what was it, Buffalo. That's
yes.
It. That's all I can think of.
Those are the only two in, the past 10, 15 years? Maybe you could say Anders Breivik as well?
I don't think he mentioned replacement theory, but I could be wrong.
But, I mean, they were still saying he was a neo-Nazi and was inspired in that sense,
Sure, but just if you actually wanted to make the claim that the shootings are on the rise because of this thing, I was like, well, I can't think of many.
Neither can I. But either way, the bill was put forward by this person, a Sheila Jackson Lee, unsurprisingly Democrat representative of the House. She has criticised the Tea Party in the past. In the July 2010 NAACP National Convention, she said they were the KKK. Perfectly sane thing to say.
I want lower taxes. Klansman.
Yep, that's just what Hitler wanted as well. Jackson Lee supports the Equality Act, a bill that would expand the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964 to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So she's just the modern Democrat, really, isn't she? She's just the absolute lunatic. She's an absolute lunatic, which is exactly what the leftists and the Democrats want. And I looked to see what coverage was going on this on the right wing, and Fox News decided to try and get in touch with her and her office for an explanation on what any of the descriptions in the bill mean, what white supremacy is classified as. As you would expect, they didn't get back to them. Big surprise. But they also got some clarification on what the consequences could be from a law professor, Jonathan Turley from George Washington University, who is saying just, it's going to destroy free speech laws, overrides the First Amendment. He also points out that a reasonable person is common in the law, but Turley commented on how Jackson Lee's bill uses it to consider how a person with a predisposition to commit a hate crime might act. How would a reasonable person discern a predisposition to engage in white supremacy? Turley asked, likening it to the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's 1964 test for pornography, in which he said, "I know it when I see it," rather than offer any clear definition. So white supremacy is just when you feel... You can taste it in the air. Tastes like white supremacy to me. And then just, okay, that's all we need to hear. Bam, convicted, guilty. I also saw that New York Post, shockingly enough, were reporting on this. And for some reason, decided to basically carry some water for this bill by giving the one example of a genuine white supremacist shooting from the past 5 or 6 years, that by pointing out the Buffalo massacre that you were talking about, instead of talking about all of the other massive hate crime kind of things that you could talk about, like all of the BLM riots, shootings, anti-Asian attacks, all sorts. Because I can give some examples of BLM and Antifa-inspired murders and assaults. There was the Baton Rouge shooter from, I think it was 2016 or 2017, the guy who just went, black guy, inspired by BLM, just goes crazy and shoots like 8 or 9 police officers just because he's heard from BLM that police are bad. Okay, no mention of that. We've got Darrell Brooks from a few years ago, just plowed through a Christmas parade because he hated white people. The entirety of the 2020 summer riots, Antifa attacking Andy No, killing of Aaron Danielson, which was the guy who was just walking through Portland wearing a Trump/Patriot Prayer hat, just got shot in the middle of the street by Antifa. Okay, and even David Dorn, who you covered that time, who's the black retired police officer who went to go and try and help his friend's business, who just got murdered by a mob of people.
Yeah, I mean, he was murdered because he tried to stop them from looting. It wasn't necessarily about politics, but the whole situation...
Well, apparently that's anti-black action.
Well, the whole situation had been caused by BLM.
Yeah, exactly. And they would probably make the argument that he was upholding white supremacist oppression by trying to get them to stop robbing a shop.
Whilst counting their money.
Mm-hmm.
They got out of the whole thing.
That's just how this works. That's the regime that we live in, sadly. And just to clarify a few points, we looked a few weeks ago at the Global Terrorism Index, so we can actually just verify whether right-wing or far-right or far-left terrorism, and that would include things like white supremacist shootings and such, is the bigger issue. And we can just see it. Just go to the graphs for me, please, John. So, page 34, incidents and deaths from terrorism in the West by ideology. Most recently, far right, not bigging up its numbers. Not bigging up its numbers compared to the far left.
Been decreasing since, what is it, 2017? Something like that?
Yeah, it looks like it would have been 2018 is when it hit, 2018, 2019 is when it hit kind of a peak, and then it's just gone down to
rapidly.
Basically nothing in 2021. Okay, all right. If we go to the next one as well, that just says it all, doesn't it? For those listening, so it's far left and far right terrorism in the West, 2007 to 2021. It's always been more on the far left side, to the point where it's almost been double in 2018, far left to far right. It was catching up in 2019, but then by 2021, far right terrorism is just nothing. And far left terrorism is massive. But you don't see any bills being put forward by any House of Representatives to just ban far left terrorism or the causes of such, or the organisations that promote such things in the mainstream public. But if there's one thing we can content ourselves with, it's the fact that the House is majority Republican at the moment, so the likelihood is that when this bill goes through, unless the respectable GOP thinks otherwise, I really hope it doesn't, this bill is not likely to pass, but it is good to know that this is what's going on, because as soon as they get through control of the House again, more bills like this are likely to come through. And for those who think, because I know this happens sometimes, that we in the UK are just making fun of America for being a place that's full of ridiculous laws and stupid nonsense, don't worry, the UK is also not immune to a little game of silly buggers from time to time, because I saw this article from Guido Fawkes, Order, where the Home Office has released a recent document guideline on what language to use, where it's now homosexual is now an offensive phrase. Okay, we live in a very, very silly world.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to check out all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium videos we do, this one on the cultural fall of wisdom itself. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.